Thank you all for coming to the Urban Design and Architecture Advisory Panel today, April 10th. We have one item this morning to review, which is the Park Heights redevelopment, phases 2 through 4. This is a master plan review and is the second part. Previously, the panel has reviewed the multifamily, both the senior and multifamily buildings, 2 buildings, and 17 detached dwellings. And this is the next couple phases, which will all be detached dwellings, all in the same area. I would just double check, make sure we're not having any missed emails. It's very strange. So I'm going to pass it over to Osborne. Would you be able to act as chair until Pavlina is able to join us?
Sure, not a problem.
Okay, I'm going to pass it to you. If you could introduce the panel, and then Heather, you should be able to share your screen.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Osborne Anthony. I'm an architect, one of the panelists here. Today, I'm joined by Sharon Bradley, landscape architect, as well as Kevin Storm, architect and planner. Hopefully, Pavlina, or chair, will join us at some point. But nonetheless, thanks for joining. We're happy to see this project come to fruition. And Heather, I'll probably turn it over to you. Just a couple of quick ground rules. Again, you try to get through the presentation as quickly as possible and allow some time for questions and or comments at the end. Thanks. It's all yours. You can start whenever you're ready.
Sorry, having a trouble so I can see you guys as I present. Bear with me 1 second. Okay. Can we see the presentation?
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much. All right. I'm actually going to turn it over to Gabby. She will be doing a brief introduction of the project and the project team, and then I will move forward with the overall presentation itself.
Hi everyone, my name is Gabrielle Happy. I'm with the NHP Foundation. The NHP Foundation and Hanson are the developer for the Park Heights MRA site, of which was noted earlier that the multifamily has already come up for UDAAP. So today we're just here to talk about the single family portion of the development. STV is our civil engineer, and we're going to have NVR as the home builder for the site.
Thank you. All right. Oh, welcome, Pavlina. I just saw you pop up. All right, so welcome Park Heights redevelopment phases 2 to 4. The project use is residential and open space. We're currently zoned R6. We tucked in the project timeline as well. We have design review today as listed first, with the anticipation of SPRC next month, and then stormwater management concept and the forest stand delineation FSD anticipated for submittal in August. Starting off with some of the project goals, this is similar to what was provided in the original RFP. Number 1 is the continuation of the established framework set forth by Park Heights Redevelopment Master Plan, Phase 1. Create diversity of new housing opportunities that accommodate a range of households, small and large, families, singles, and seniors. Distribute housing types in concert with street character to reinforce the existing street pattern and hierarchy. transform existing streets through both landscape and new building to create strong pedestrian-friendly streetscapes, create a diversity of public and private open spaces, convey an image of permanence and solidity in the image of the new buildings with a language that borrows from features from the neighborhood without imitating them. So let's get into the design and thoughts. So project location, we are located in Central Park Heights. The red shape is actually phases 1 through 4. We're bound by this overall redevelopment is bound by Park Heights Avenue to the northeast and Reisterstown Road just about skimming it to the southwest. As we move forward, and I'll say Pimlico is just to the north. As we move forward, I'm going to reverse rotation, so keep that in mind, but we do have north arrows. So once again, north is actually top left corner of the screen. But I wanted to show the breakdown of the project itself. The highlighted section in blue is Park Heights Redevelopment Phase 1. The senior building is actually currently under construction with a ribbon cutting scheduled, I believe it's May 10th or thereabouts, and infrastructure associated with the Phase 1 development is currently underway and coming to a close as well. The multifamily building has been submitted for permit, which is located to the right of the senior building. And then the 17 single-family homes have gone through pre-development meeting. We're working on, we're scheduled for the Planning Commission in the near future. And then as we go into the red, we have the Park Heights redevelopment phases 2 to 4, which is our project limits of today's plan. But just wanted to show the overall master plan for phases 1 to 4. We've also included the C.C. Jackson Park because that is anticipated for a groundbreaking later this year, to my understanding, and it's an integral component to the project itself. These are the existing conditions, just showing more in a streamline. We are showing that the existing conditions for phase 1 is built, but we're looking at that as a master plan, as how we relate to the project itself. And as I had mentioned, the phase 1 construction, I thought that was important to show what is currently being developed or constructed and the theme of the project overall. While we're certainly not proposing a multifamily building, as shown here is the senior building, but this is the level of character and design that's been incorporated in the plan, as well as to the right page, expanded tree pits, and an increased width of sidewalk and some decorative scoring patterns. So the existing conditions of phase 2 to 4, it's essentially a raised lot, or shall we say multiple lots. The homes are no longer there, but there's remnants of the homes in some locations. The alleys are still existing or have been somewhat grown over. And unfortunately, there's very poor looking trees as well, dappled throughout. So here's just some of the images of the location. As you can see in this bottom right-hand corner, the senior building is in the background. A few more images of the alley connections and Woodland Avenue is this one here. Also captured a few images in regards to the adjacent architecture and homes. So we have duplexes as well as townhomes or row homes. And then there's an adjacent apartment building to the plan south of our development. To establish the framework of the overall master plan, the real guiding factor was the existing infrastructure. So as you can see, don't have to identify each utility, but the existing utilities essentially run throughout Woodland Avenue, Virginia Avenue, DuPont Avenue, with the exception of some of the overhead utilities that are, of course, typically found also in the rear of the existing alleys. But that was the framework of keeping that infrastructure to not incur additional costs, to be budget friendly, but also to work with the context of the existing neighborhood as well. So diagrams, we have circulation. To the left is the existing circulation patterns. We have two-way and we have one-way. So Park Heights Avenue is a two-way road. It's definitely a main artery, but there's a good amount of traffic that flows through Woodland Avenue as it connects to Reisterstown Road. And then Virginia Avenue is one way from Homer, which is right here, Homer jogs. But the thing that we wanted to keep in mind as well is Virginia Avenue is actually serving as a gateway for phase one development as a whole, which has been widened and is now going to be a two-way road. But the continuation as we transition into the proposed single-family detached development, it's one way as existing and loops around to DuPont as the one way up to Homer again. To the right, it's showing, honestly, there's no change in circulation per the proposed. We're keeping that infrastructure intact. So connection to open space is a big one for the project. Is to the left, we have the existing open space. We have C.C. Jackson Park, or what soon will be the expansion of C.C. Jackson, as well as the library. In the existing connection, we have pockets throughout of green space. But what we're proposing is integrating additional pockets. I don't want to say it's an emerald necklace, but a very small scale of the thought of integrating smaller pockets of green space that also flows through the connection of sidewalks through into the future development of C.C. Jackson Park. So the darker bluish color are our proposed open spaces. Pedestrian circulation. So one thing we certainly want to provide is the ability for users or residents to be able to circulate throughout as well as through and get to these open spaces. So sometimes these spaces may connect quite literally and touch each other, but in other cases we will have expanded sidewalks that are tree lined and the connection of safe circulation throughout, so they'd have the ability to traverse through the park. We'll get into the through the alley connection as well to another park and thus be able to get to C.C. Jackson Park or to the south of the adjacent green space. We have tennis courts, basketball courts down towards the south and a playground. So going back to my statement that Park Heights Phase 1 was the thought of Virginia Avenue as the establishment of the gateway to the community. This is actually to show as a focal point. So the thought throughout here is the establishment of that green space that we showed in the previous slide. The star is a proposed focal point. So it's the heart of the community. It's quite the view shed as we come through down to the center of the development, and you'll be able to actually see this. And I'll go back to the cover slide towards the end of the presentation, but you'll see this focal point. Not going to get into the weeds, but it's here if anybody has questions. Zoning analysis. We are proposing these single-family detached dwelling units. They're fee simple. We are providing one parking space per dwelling unit at minimum, and I'll get into more of the detail in certain site plan layout. So throughout the development, we came up with several concepts. I want to say we got up to letter, I don't know, K or M, something along those lines, but this is just a snip of where we went. They certainly look like they're finalized. They are. They just happen to have some color wash in MicroStation. But we looked at each sort of option of how do we still maintain that framework and then utilize all of the space that's part of the project limits. Highlighting just a few is the next slide. This one here, once again, is just a brief introduction to the assessment and the amount of master plan development that we went through. So just a comparison of a few of them. These are concepts 2, 6, and 7, some pros and cons I'll go over somewhat quickly. Pros for concept 2 to the left. It was actually the most diversified portfolio. So in this location, in this scheme, the lighter shade are single-family detached homes, and then the darker shade is actually townhomes. So diversified portfolio, higher dwelling unit count. However, some of the cons, which are somewhat consistent throughout, is increased infrastructure. We have a unique situation in particular, plan left of Woodland Avenue is how to tuck in homes with the extra space that's there. It's a little atypical layout, but we are working with that, so that's in increased infrastructure needs of the actual creation of new road. It was the most costly to construct. Option 6, or concept 6, it was a diversified portfolio once again. We have some improved front-to-front relationships. And then, for instance, front-to-front over here and some more over here. Increased opportunity for stormwater management. Now that we have that open space of the green located, I think we've mentioned this as kind of the finger or the thumb of the development here. But then once again, we need increased infrastructure needs to tuck in to increase the density. Another option we explored is concept 7, pros, improved front-to-front relationship, increased opportunity for stormwater management, green infrastructure, continuation of existing street typology. And then the cons were least diversified portfolio, increased infrastructure needs. So let's dig into the concept where we landed. So here's the master plan. It's an enlargement to show. And what we are proposing are 3 types of single-family detached homes. As shown in the legend to the right, we have a Parker, Reese, and Tate. While those names may not really mean much to us personally, they are we'll have a breakdown of showing what those sizes are, which essentially dictated where the lots may lie. We have proposed alleys as connection and circulation through the back for parking. And going through just as a whole, I'm going to walk you through on Homer, for instance, first. Along Homer Ave, we have the Reese lining the street here, which are actually fronting the 17 single-family homes across the street. So the big point is the connection of the front-to-front and that neighborhood experience here. We also have all the front-to-fronts as we flow throughout, with the exception down here as the finger. This location, we actually are proposing a muse, and then we have this nice large green space to the south of it. Along Woodland Avenue, it keeps it somewhat simple as all the homes on Woodland are facing the road itself with parking once again in the back. And then we have an addition of green space as connectivity to the proposed C.C. Jackson Park over here, which we'll get into. So going to the breakdown of the Parker, Reese, and Tate, they're all 17 feet wide, and they vary in depth. So we have a 34-inch, or sorry, that would make no sense. We have a 34-foot depth for the Parker, 43 for Reese, and 42 for Tate. While they don't seem like much of a difference in depth, it actually made quite the difference overall with our configuration and working along with the existing grid network. We yield a total of 74 units based on the overall layout. And something that I wanted to mention before moving too forward is, while our plan has less diversity, the thought is the bigger picture for the master plan for Park Heights redevelopment is the consideration that we have the the multifamily building that's coming up. Thus, we have density in that regards. We have the senior building and then the 17 single-family homes. So as a portfolio as a whole, we are providing a level of diversity for home ownership. Okay, so highlighting are the Parkers. Everything else is screened back. So once again, the Parker is the 34 foot depth. So this was a little more restricted in space, which works well with the Parker itself. Next, we have the Reese. The Reese dominates with a total yield of 55 at this time. And then lastly, we have the Tate, and we're at 7 for here. So typical lot. We're showing just a standard, but we're aligning with zoning. So we have, I'm going to walk you through down here. We have a 20-foot front yard setback. This one has a porch with no living space above, so it's within that 20 feet. If the porch is part of the home, then the 20 feet, the home is actually pushed inward, if that makes sense. We have a separation between the homes at a minimum of 20 feet, an interior side yard of 10 feet. Walking through the home itself, we have the sidewalk. That's a typical connection from the 5-foot public sidewalk here. And then we have the porch, regardless of the overall layout, which we have towards the end of the presentation. The single family home as a whole that has a side door leading to the back patio, which has a door as well back here. And then we have the opportunity, and majority of the location is providing not only a detached garage, but also a parking pad. So we are meeting, if not exceeding, the parking requirements, but we're also providing all that, off-street parking access through the alley. Then the typical width of the lot is 37 feet, and then the depth does vary based on where the lots are located and the framework of the adjacent street network. So open space programming, that was a big one to sort of assess as we looked more holistically of what type of amenities are currently existing in close proximity to our development. So I'm not going to necessarily read through all of them, but you can see I have a total of 13 listed in this small snip. But we looked at this and thinking of all these walkable amenities close by, what can we provide or what should we provide without taking away from the adjacent programming? Then we did a comparison. We looked at each amenity space, each one, and we looked at, are there elements of play? Is there a community garden, outdoor playing fields, entertainment, a pool, walking paths, seating areas, grilling, and fitness stations? So what we landed on is, while keeping in mind the goals, provide a connection to places of existing active recreation, complement existing open spaces, provide places of passive recreation, and then bring people together. You're going to remember that this is a small community, new development opportunity for those to come into smaller scale of those green spaces or open spaces. Labeling these, number 1, which will be right here as my cursor shows, just dubbing it as Woodland Retreat. Then we have green linkage, number 2. And as we traverse across, we have a community gateway. Once again, here's the star of that focal point. And then we have the Great Lawn to the south of Page South. I threw in a quote that I'll read really quickly from Frederick Law Olmsted. We're certainly not becoming Frederick Law Olmsted in that essence, but I thought it resonated well. We want a ground to which people may easily go when the day's work is done, and where they may stroll for an hour, seeing, hearing, and feeling nothing of the bustle and jar of the streets, where they shall, in effect, find the city put far away from them. So drilling into each zone, this is the Woodland Retreat, one that's located here in this key plan. The thought is to create a sense of place of woods, So not necessarily forest bathing or something along those lines, but the opportunity to have green space and to have canopy that comes back into the neighborhood. It's a nice complement to the adjacent C.C. Jackson Park, where there will be walking trails. Perhaps there's a little bit of more of a meadow that's simply maintained as a little bit of a circulation throughout this pathway system. But in all honesty, too, being a landscape architect, we know that it's also an opportunity to provide afforestation. There's going to be a big hit for afforestation and just Forest Conservation Act as well. And this is a nice bufferage and that continuation of the park that provides an area of respite. So we have a little bit of themes throughout of each of the green spaces. Green linkage is going to be the smallest of the green spaces, but the goal and the thought is from C.C. Jackson across Woodland Avenue, we have this little pocket park. And then through there, you traverse a decorative, perhaps, or at least, a level surface in regards to a crosswalk that leads you into the next Park 3. So it is more of a connecting, thus the linkage, and a small opportunity to show that with a little bit of characteristics of some plantings, a bench, and so forth. But the goal is to open it up and has that visual connection as well as a means of circulation. 3. So we have the community gateway. As I mentioned, there's the focal point. We have perhaps the bufferage of the landscaping in here, larger swaths, walking trails, a focal point, perhaps as thus shown here, I'm going blank for a second, a gateway feature itself. So it's a visual cue, but also a place where the community comes together, and it's the center of the development itself. And as I mentioned as a pro before, there's an opportunity for stormwater management, a green infrastructure, not getting into the details of how we've explored stormwater management, but on a high level, the high point's up here, and it essentially flows across to a lower point this way. So the thought is we'd be able to capture stormwater management within 3, the community gateway, and then the lowest point that we have for the community, or for the next number 4. So lush landscaping as well. And then lastly, for the finger, we have a great lawn. So it's the ability for the community to come together. There's going to be eyes on this lawn. The existing homes, duplexes, and row homes all front this open space, but it's really just a different function where it's more open. We have a lawn, and then we have eyes on that park as well. And then once again, incorporation of green infrastructure with, for instance, a microbio-retention facility, perhaps. So neighborhood typology, we explored several different options that were served as precedents for the project, one of which could simply be the Uplands Phase 1, these single-family homes located in West Baltimore. And then we also have Frankfurt Estates looking at this of how they were laid out as well. And this is in, I'd say, West Baltimore, essentially very vague in that direction, but that's essentially where we are. Getting into some street sections or typical sections, Virginia Avenue, once again, leading from Park Heights down into this heart with the focal point and green space here. This is the front-to-front connection as the section shows in the key plan. We have front yard. Here's the right-of-way line, same on the other side. We have the public sidewalk of 5 feet. And then this is actually an opportunity because we have a larger right-of-way width here and probably say a smaller road footprint. We have the opportunity to incorporate bioretention swales. So these are plus or minus 8 to 9 feet on either side, and it wouldn't be a continuous run, but nonetheless we'll be able to capture some of that runoff in these facilities. And it also aligns with one of the facilities that's currently under construction under Phase 1 Park Heights redevelopment, the infrastructure portion, the DA portion of the project. Then mirror image, essentially, just a reminder, this is one-way road at this location. We have on-street parking and then just the one lane. So with that being said, we have the bioretention swale once again, we have a sidewalk, and then that front yard space. We are incorporating as much trees as we can. So that would be the street trees, and then also we would have a plan, a typical plan per lot of the standard foundation plantings as well, but with the incorporation of trees, at least one per lot as well. Woodland Avenue is a little different. We still have the same, front yard setbacks that we're adhering to. We have a 5-foot sidewalk, and then we have a planting strip. So a little different in the sense that we have more of that running green space planting strip, mostly grass with trees dappled in at minimum of the 25 to 45. We like to often do the 30-foot on center. And then we have Woodland Avenue, which is 2 ways with parking on one side. Just to reiterate, we are not, we are keeping the same footprint of the road, the width, the curb. There will be minor improvements as needed. So that's really the dictating as the existing. Landscape plan. Once again, just going through, we've labeled each green space. We have the woodland retreat. We have the green linkage, the community gateway space, and then the great lawn. And then, of course, we have major trees, and then the purple ones are minor trees, but less vegetation shown overall here. We have started to study the major trees or the overall plant palette, so here's a glimpse of those. Anything from the honey locust to the willow oaks to the sweet gums and white oaks, definitely wanting to provide some diversity overall to the neighborhood. And then, of course, we have minor trees. We do have overhead power lines in some locations. In particular, if we have some in the back with the pocket parks, and then just making sure we have some of those nice dappling of color. So we have serviceberry, red buds, and cherries. At this time, we're mostly considering a higher percentage of native species. I'm sure we all have probably heard it, especially during these presentations, of having that 70-30 or so, but that's the exploration of plant materials. And then bioretention, we have the opportunity to incorporate the swamp rose mallow, one of my personal favorites, native as well. We have switchgrasses, coneflowers, not a native, but does really well, low maintenance of the Walker's low catmint. Now, the preliminary architectural renderings. Here's a rendering showing perhaps the street view of the units. So we're seeing those side by side, and we'll get into each unit itself next. So this is the Parker. I'm going to go back to my cheat sheet. This is a 17 by 34, and we have 14 of these. But this is what the Parker essentially would look like. We have the detached garage for the options. We do have the 10, didn't mention it, but we do have at least a minimum of 10-foot separation from the garage and the home itself. And these all have lovely porches similar to the existing adjacent homes that all have the porches. I think one of the things I had read is Park Heights neighborhood in general is known for those porches as well. Then we have the Reese model. It's 17 feet by 43 feet in depth. Once again, we have the garage in the rear, a porch in the front. I wanted to reiterate the homes do have customization options. As mentioned, NVR is our home builder for the project, and there's opportunity for minor changes on the homes themselves. And then going backwards a little bit is the plan that we had shown previously actually proposed the largest home that could be accommodated in the lot. With that being said, meaning that if someone comes to purchase a lot, they have the ability to perhaps go backwards and want a bigger yard and a smaller home by a few feet, and they could go, for instance, with the park, or even though a Reese would fit. So it sounds a little confusing, but there are options overall and flexibility for home ownership in this layout. Then my last slide is the Tate. This rendering is actually showing more of the high visibility side. So high visibility sides of what we're saying at major intersections, for instance, we would have more articulation. For instance, here we have additional windows or doors. We have the wraparound of the water table. I'm not an architect, so forgive me using incorrect terms, but for instance, the Tate itself, this is the situation where I say the living space actually extends above the porch, unlike the other two models. And then lastly, I just wanted to go backwards. And once again, here's our gateway photo that I alluded to, of having perhaps a gazebo or some sort of visual effect in that location of our central park. So I think that's it. I'm opening to questions.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Heather, for a very clear and thorough presentation. Much appreciated. Apologies for my late arrival. I had a hard time getting in. Hopefully I didn't delay things much. I think I only missed the initial introductions, but of this team at that point, it was seamless for me. So again, thank you for taking us through the project. A number of us did review these very first phases. I have been familiar with the larger site for over 10 years when we first started studying it with planning department and students at Morgan State. So this has been a long time coming, and I couldn't be happier to see it progress through its various phases and, finally seeing like these pockets of neighborhood getting rebuilt. It really has been a long process leading to this. So it's an exciting day. Thank you for bringing your work and for sharing it with us. The presentation was very thorough and clear. Thank you for showing us some of your progress and process and all that. So I'd still like to give a few minutes for any clarifying questions from the panel, and then we can offer some comments. I'll start with Sharon Bradley this morning. Sharon, what are your questions for the team?
And yes, it was a very clear and complete presentation, so thank you. Unfortunately for you, you were clear enough that it gave me new questions, so that gave rise, that arose as you spoke. So I do have a fair number. They're minor, just to understand better what the direction is here, understanding that we are at the master plan phase. I just have them in the order that aligns with the way they appeared in the presentation. So my first question was, what is the actual connection to Jackson Park? What physically is the connection? How do people do that?
Sure. So there's actually a connection to the north that's under phase 1 that was proposed with the project itself, but the connection is really at the intersections, traversing at the ramps, getting to that connection. So the physical connection, as you get there, you do have to cross roadways where there will be crosswalks and there's minor pedestrian improvements. The physical connection, we abut the park itself and the future development of the park. But also the thought is the view shed of being able to see that connectivity of green space, while it's maybe a little more prominent of these three in particular, that was also the physical and visual connection.
Okay, thanks. That leads me to my next question. I mean, you spoke about these parks as a system, and it's great to see the series of parks. Is it possible at all to create a pedestrian network that links these? You talked about the Emerald Necklace, and we all love those projects where you can actually move through the park system, if not completely independent of the street system, somewhat. Is there a way to connect these that way?
I think so. So the thought throughout, for instance, from this woodland retreat is the way that the trees are laid out, you'd be able to traverse and connect easily through that into, I don't have the landscape plan of CC Jackson, but integrate into the park itself. So it might be a off beaten path to some respect. But the bigger thing is that we do have that connection, the direct connection along Woodland Avenue here. Throughout those, as I think I showed in a precedent of that connectivity between these two green spaces, with the thought that the typical alley is a V section for Baltimore City. So we would have to, finesse the grading to make sure we have more of a decorative connection in regards to a crosswalk. So that's the idea through there. And then coming up to the intersection to traverse into the park in this proposed parking lot. So I don't know if that answers the question a little bit. So there is connection, but it might have to be a little more sidewalk and then maybe off the beaten path to some respect once we have their landscape plan.
Yeah, and I think you're heading in the right direction if you're thinking in terms of green alleys, for example, so that they feel friendlier and more welcoming. They become part of the pedestrian system. So if you are keeping the existing street infrastructure, you can activate the alleys as that pedestrian network. Okay. Do you know off the top of your head just generally the size of the open spaces, just so we can grasp the scale of how these feel in the community?
Do I know those? I may have to say, Walt, could you pull that up and we can circle back? I want to say this one might be 1/3 of an acre.
Get up and I'll get right back to you.
Okay, thank you. They have finessed a little bit as we've modified the layout, but I believe this one is around 1/3, which means
Okay.
probably this is more like a half and a half.
That helps. That helps understand that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And then again, this is just at the master plan phase, but can you talk a little bit, let us know if you've had any thoughts yet about how to activate that focal point space so that it's not just a visual, gazebo item that doesn't really, draw the community to it. I mean, it seems to me that it should be a focal hub in terms of its activity. So have you started thinking at all about how that place will be articulated for that?
Sure. Well, we certainly want spaces to be activated and lived in. The thought is truly to have them be passive. So certainly there's still the opportunity. I would like it to have the ability for, the adjacent properties to come out and simply kick a ball around. I have 2 younger children, so any part of green and getting out there is really important. But I think that there would be that gazebo hub. We've internally discussed as well as the opportunity to do some sort of solar opportunity there as well. So we're exploring those options within, and then having that, I believe, is more like a Wi-Fi connection as a central hub. So it's really, I think that space is the activation is a little more passive of having that meandering path, having that visual, cue, but having really then be able to picnic and so forth coming out into that space. Really an extension of your backyard, to be honest, as well.
Okay, and my last question, what is the Muse? What is happening there and what's its function?
So in order to provide those 4 individual lots, we don't have street frontage. So with the Muse, that's essentially serving as the requirement for zoning. So that is how we were able to get that additional space. But the Muse itself will have tree-lined, well, let's go see if just go to the plan real quick. And it's a high level of landscape plan. But we have trees as a bufferage. I think it's really going to have like a circulation of another pathway through the Muse itself. But really that's what it's serving as. So we can provide those additional units, but it will be landscaped for zoning requirements.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Kevin, what are your questions for the team?
Thanks. I just want to reiterate that how nice and clear and thorough the presentation was. So thank you. First question is, you talked a little bit about the diversified portfolio, but just what was the reasoning behind, or why did you abandon the row house typology completely? I mean, it seems like there's a couple of spots, like along Woodland or Virginia, where you could have continued like what's already kind of happening on the roadway, and had a few spots of row houses. Just curious about like why that was just left behind.
Sure. There was a little bit discussion of would they be rentals, would they be, for sale and so forth. And really it came down to is I'll say Baltimore City may have a somewhat of a lack of single-family home opportunity or home ownership. So that was something that was really important, is to create the opportunity for that. And
But
then,
just sorry to interrupt you, but row houses are single family homes, right?
but these are single-family detached.
Okay,
Sorry.
so it's detached specifically. Okay.
Yeah, so the detached was more so of the driving factor. So those have the ability to have that home ownership of a detached. Well, there's certainly a surplus of the attached adjacent in regards to the existing row homes.
Okay. Thanks. And then just did you consider, with the garages in the back, did you consider the possibility of ADUs, of like a over the garage apartment, or the ability for those garages to be used for home studio, like work from home, or for a rental unit?
I don't believe we studied that, but then it might get a little muddy in regards to zoning. So I'd have to look into that, to be frank, of does that adhere to our setback requirements and so forth. But no, we simply looked at it as the opportunity for a single car or 2-car garage, as well as the parking pad as the lots could provide.
Okay, and then just, and this might be a naive question because I wasn't involved in the earlier reviews for phase 1, but who owns and manages these 4 parks that you're proposing, and who manages, maintains, and programs them?
Sure. The thought is it would be part of an HOA, so they would have a landscape contractor that would oversee the parks to ensure that they, they're maintained, essentially. So that is the thought throughout those spaces, that they would have to be to make sure that they stay clean and green.
And are they wide open? Like, are they fenced, or are they completely accessible, or is there some variety? Okay.
There's no, as of right now, there's no barriers, so the adjacent community and all are welcome.
Great. And then just really quick, 2 more quick questions. Are there guidelines for the homeowners after they purchase and move in? Do you have guidelines for fences by any chance, or just how people kind of organically start to just peek into the public realm and build 6-foot opaque fences and just start to kind of change the character of the open spaces? I was just wondering if that's been a consideration.
I do not know that we've gotten to that level as of yet, but I'm sure it would, if there would be an HOA, that the requirements would be ingrained in there, as well as, colors of homes and everything.
Yep.
Fortunately, I think in some of the corner lots, the view sheds will be preserved because they're corner and you're restricted by height. But that's something, it's a really good point to make sure we consider as we chase through the development.
And then last question, just how deep are the front porches, just generally dimension-wise?
I'm going to say they're 6 to 8. They're actually pretty generous. Do I have that? I didn't dimension it. I think they're 6 to 8, if that makes sense, plus or minus. So it's enough to at least put some furniture, and let's see.
Yep.
Maybe Walt, you could pull that one up too.
6 to 8 is correct.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Those are all my questions. Thank you.
Great, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. And Osborne, what are your questions for the team?
Sure, just a few. If you can go back to the site plan. Thank you. So I think I heard you say the site generally slopes down from the north, kind of west to the southeast. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so it's not more of an undulating topography as you kind of go east-west. It's also pitching in that one direction. Okay, great. And then parking, I think there's parking on Woodland. Is there also parking on Virginia?
Yes. So Virginia is one way, but there is on-street parking, which we're going to still maintain. And then there is parking on one side of Woodland, but Woodland is 2-way. So yes, there's on-street parking.
Okay, and on Woodland, the side that there's parking, is that the east or the side towards Beaufort?
I just bring up this section. Yes, I do. Just needed a reminder of looking up. The parking is actually on the page left side currently.
Okay, so that's the side with the intervening street. Okay. And then just a few more questions. So on Virginia, as you kind of come around the lawn area, does the parking just continue around there as well?
I don't think it would fully continue. So if you're going along Virginia, you mean down through here?
Yes.
Parking does continue. I mean, it is beyond the improvements of our project because these homes will remain. But yes,
Well, at least on the side with the lawn.
the side of the grass here,
Yeah.
there would be no parking on that side
Okay.
of the road.
Great. Thanks. And onto the building typologies, you did say that the owners are afforded some measure of flexibility in terms of which building model, I guess, they can select. But that doesn't necessarily mean that if I'm mid-block, I can select the Tate versus. In other words, it seems to me that the models are grouped, right? You understand
They
what I'm
are
asking?
no, I understand. So yes, we have grouped them per se, but going backwards. So for instance, the Parker being the smallest in depth, that area could only be the Parker. But then once we get to the next section, this area is the Reese. So it's going to be a tongue twister. The Reese could be a Parker because it's a difference of 9 feet. But this is what we shown is like the maximum size that could be shown. So anything thereafter could be smaller if there's an option to be smaller. So same with this one. The Tate is 42 feet, so it could only be a Parker otherwise, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I know what you're doing. And then I'm sorry, I have a lot of questions, but it's important for me to fully understand. And then of these models, it seems as though they're all, in as much as they do have porches, they're all kind of like a walk-in model, right? There's no grade elevation where you step up onto the porch, or from the porch you step up into the unit. Everything is pretty much at grade. Is that correct? Is that a deliberate choice, or?
So in certain situations, that is correct. But to be frank, for instance, the 17 single family homes that we are currently developing CDs for, there's quite a grade difference. So in certain locations, there will be ample steps within the sidewalk to get up to that. We haven't fully studied grading, but I know in particular, for instance, this section, so the Woodland Avenue alley serving these units, there's quite a grade bust. So there is some things that we will be identifying. So for instance, meaning the grade bust is the alley is higher than the lot itself. So the detached garage will be higher perhaps than the unit. So we'll have to play with the grade to make that work. So there will be some stairs as needed, but ultimately the minimum would be, go back to a picture. At the minimum, there'll be one step to the porch and then a step into the house.
Okay. Yeah, I was more interested in the character of the street, and how that works. And then let's see, just two more very quick questions. If you go back to the site plan, so Buford Avenue, in the spirit of connectivity, in terms of being able to kind of link the community as a whole, has there been any consideration to, even if it's an alley, a walkway, a means of connecting through, to connect, let's say, if I'm on Woodland and I'm trying to get down to the lawn, almost like an extension of Buford all the way through to Virginia? Have you guys considered that at all?
I mean,
Even if it's just a pedestrian
we
connection.
did. Just trying to see. We did it a couple different ways. You probably can't see, it's a little grainy as I zoom in, but for instance, here's the Beaufort as you connect, and then we had a small, like 20-foot wide open space serving for connectivity to the park. So we've looked at those opportunities, and you can see it perhaps here as well. But then when we had our pre-UDAAP and some just general coordination, the concept or the thought was opening the space up more so here at this alley and woodland adjacent to the park to provide more of that porosity into that center park. So we have studied it here and there. I just didn't speak of it.
Okay. All right. And final question. Promise.
Yes.
This community is being set up for families. Families have kids. And, I do welcome and appreciate the idea that you've got a number of open spaces. But one very interesting feature that kids love is water. Have you considered any water features at all? Features
At
at all?
this time, no, we have not, but I might be wrong, but some reason I thought CC Jackson might have a water feature. Does that ring? I guess I shouldn't be asking, but I believe that's the case. But no, we have not considered water internally.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you.
And I think Kelly might be able to answer the water feature question. Kelly?
I just wanted to mention there is a pool at CC Jackson.
Yeah, there is a pool. Wasn't sure if there was like a splash pad kind of thing as well proposed.
Okay. Thank you so much. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Osborne. A lot
In
of
addition, I just wanted to bring to everyone's attention that Walt did put some of the acreages for the green space in the chat. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Most of my questions got answered as others have asked them. I only have one, and I'm left. And I'm sorry if it was mentioned or somehow missed it. And it's probably more of a comment, but I want to ask it as a question so that I can address it in my comments. Is there a reason, or have you studied the gazebo space, kind of the focal point piece, on the corner of Homer and Virginia as opposed to on the alley side? Like, for example, those first two houses on the left that are on Homer and Virginia, like as you're coming down that view shed. Have you studied putting the actual focal point arrival hub at the corner there rather than behind the houses and like on the side of houses? I didn't see it in some of the sketches before. Maybe I missed it. I don't know if I looked at every single one of them.
You did not miss it. I'll be honest, we did not study it. It was more of the original concept for the overall development. It's always had the green space pushed inward to the community. But no, we have not studied that at this time.
Okay, I'm glad I asked it this way. Well, let me then ask a follow-up question. Is there any reason not to have it there? But if you haven't studied it, then you probably you haven't analyzed that. So feel free to say, no, we haven't looked at it, we haven't talked about it. I'm not looking for direct. But in case you've discussed it and considered it, I'd like to know if it was rejected or like.
We have not studied it, but I know part of the establishment of Homer was really having that community feel of having the front to fronts. That would be my only answer, and that's the only thing I can
answer on the spot. I understood. Yeah. I mean, in fact, what's standing out to me is that right there on that left corner, I'm looking at it's fronts to sides, so it's even more of a reason to like. Anyways, we'll talk about it in comments. But I just wanted to know in case you guys have looked at it and it doesn't work out. Okay. Thank you again. We'll circle all the way back around and see what the panel has to say about this, if they have any suggestions, comments, and all that. Sharon, would you lead us into it, please?
Thanks. Perfect segue, because that was going to be one of my comments, that the focal point is kind of tucked behind a row of houses, and if it's supposed to be a gateway, you're already in. I mean, if your goal is to create a gateway feature, you're already inside this new part of the community when you introduce your gateway feature. So I think it's worth studying to see if this truly can be at the hub, at the heart, and as a portal feature that might satisfy your own goals maybe a little more effectively. So I do think it's worth the study. And while we're on the topic of that park, I really do think we've all seen the suburban park with the gazebo in the middle that nobody goes to. It really needs a reason for being. And so whether it's a community that would grill? You know, is it picnic? Is it playground? Is it, even if there are playgrounds around, and I totally get that point and appreciated you pointing out the proximities of amenities, it's super helpful. But as you know, if you have young kids, you don't want to walk a half a mile. It's nice to have a neighborhood playground where you can go with toddlers very easily and quickly. So I think activating that space and programming that space is going to be really important. And then, as Pavlina mentioned, alluded to, I think the placement of that space is really critical if it's meant to be a welcoming portal / gateway feature, entering the community, almost a branding identity kind of thing too for the community. If that's the goal, there might be other places that are more relevant. I do think it's going to be really important to emphasize the alley system as a pedestrian system, not just to make it more welcoming for pedestrians, but also to avoid barriers, because if they do become unwelcoming, dirty, risky feeling places, those are actually barriers to circulation at that point. And we certainly don't want to create that here. Definitely not your intent. So creating a welcoming and safe pedestrian system that makes use of an infrastructure that you already have there, the alleys. So I think that's Baltimore has a great green alley tradition, so you definitely have many precedents to draw on there. Talked about the gateway, love the canopy park. We see that so rarely, especially in urban areas where you're creating a mini forest, a place where you go to have tree canopy and that respite, as you described it. I think it's really important. And again, if we're programming these spaces for specific reasons, having a purpose that's very strong for each one will mean people will go there. And I think having a quiet, restorative space that includes tree canopy can be a very good purpose for that one, especially adjacent to the park there.
Thank you.
The idea of stormwater management throughout, for example, in the bioswales on the street, I think is very important. I hope that stays in as you develop the stormwater management plan, because again, the whole reason for this way of working with stormwater that we now use is to permeate a community with stormwater management that is garden landscape based. So it creates a park-like setting, and it spreads out the treatment of the water instead of big old huge pits in one or two places. So having that distribution of stormwater management that makes the place feel like a park, I think is very important, and people discard it too quickly when it becomes challenging. I hope it doesn't get discarded here and it becomes part of the park-like feature of this new community. And it also controls foot traffic, as we know, especially if you have parking on the street. It keeps people from just walking through the planting to get to their cars. And so there's actually a prayer that it stays over years. Tree selection was excellent. I thought the diversity of scale and seasonal interest, the native focus, I think it works really well. I think they're all appropriate for neighborhood trees. The one word of caution I would use for the palette for the bioswales is to pay attention to the winter interest.
Yes.
Everything I saw there will not be there, except for the panicum, will not be there in the winter. So developing, the red twigs and everything else that we know will provide that winter interest and keep people from, feeling like it's a trash pit or a walking place. And I believe those are all my comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Kevin, what are your comments for the team?
Thanks. I just loved all of Sharon's comments, so I want to just second all of those. I'll start by saying I think that you're like the foundation and like the basic framework and goals that you set for yourselves are really just like sound and smart and really kind of set you up for success just more generally. Not fighting the infrastructure and the grid that's there and just kind of working with it. So I think that was just really, that should go, I don't want that to go unnoticed. That was, I think, a really, really good foundational move. I think the one challenge I'm having, and I think, again, this will come with more development, you're hearing a bit of it already in some of the comments or questions, but the fact that you have kind of a series of open spaces that are kind of similarly scaled, but not quite kind of there yet in terms of identity. I think that like the canopy, the one that I love that idea too. I think that's and has a very clear and distinct kind of purpose and meaning, and it's essentially, I guess, an extension of the existing park. And I think it would be really helpful for in future presentations to sort of show the park as it's existing and proposed, and then how that park sort of ties into it. So it's really just more of an extension, or is it like something that's like its own character that's adjacent to a larger park? It's like hard to understand what that is, but ultimately it seems like that's just will come with development as you work that out. And then I also think that the Finger Park, with the lawn, is also to me very clear. It's like that space in the larger grid, if you zoom out, it's just sort of like asking for something interesting and special. It's like an unusual, like wishbone configuration of the grid, and you kind of leverage that for an interesting space, and it's going to feel, I think, very public and not quite civic, but it's going to feel very public and welcoming, just because you have these kind of different row houses and single family houses, and everyone's kind of looking onto this space, and it's just going to feel like a public place. I still think you can think about what is there besides maybe a lawn, but I think even if it was just a lawn, it'll still probably be successful. But the other ones that, and I guess maybe this is getting a little bit to Pavlina's questions, like the ones that are tucked against the alley are kind of harder to pull off in a way that is just you're looking at garages, sides of houses, and alleyways, which are going to just naturally going to have garbage cans and things, and it's just not as naturally like a public looking feeling place. So I think there's certainly like ways to make that great, and I love the green alley idea and all of that, but I think if the intent is that it's a kind of a gateway moment, I do think that intersection of Homer and Virginia just kind of makes a lot more sense, and maybe just almost like flipping those two houses and down and moving them down to Virginia and really occupying that corner. And it's also a way to kind of differentiate the kinds of spaces that you have. And I don't know, I just think that and when you have to call a space a linkage, like that, if you're talking to like an everyday person on the street, like I think that just the fact that you're using that language means that you haven't quite gotten there yet in terms of what that space actually is. And I think whether it's like a play space for tots or I think giving them some more precise a more precise vision in terms of programming and what it could be. Otherwise there is this danger that it becomes kind of leftover green space that isn't as loved, because people don't really know what it's for, and does it belong to the house that's next to it or not, and or is it public? It's kind of in this gray zone. So I think that to me, like that kind of those two adjacent, the linkage and the gateway gazebo one, and I echo the comments on the gazebo. I mean, for the once, the 3 times a year that you might actually ask a band or something to play music there, or to have like a structured, a picnic or an event, that all those other days it's just kind of sitting there in the middle, occupying what could be a gathering space, and it's just a harder thing to pull off. And then I guess the architecture of the houses. I mean, my question about the fences is just, I think it's just a really important next step as you develop the master plan, is to really, people will build like 6-foot opaque fences and try to capture as much space as they can. So as long as like your HOA guidance really talks about the nature of those, and I think like your street sections are quite nice, but I do think oftentimes when you have this more garden suburb typology, it's okay to have maybe like a low, 90% transparency, like a picket or a wrought iron fence that kind of comes up to the sidewalk. That's okay, but then if you want a more opaque fence, it kind of has to move back to to the backyard, and there's it's like maybe more aligned with the building setback. So I think like understanding that nuance and making sure that you're kind of thinking about the worst case scenarios that people will undoubtedly try to do, to kind of just so you can kind of maintain that nice street section that you have like throughout. I think that's an important consideration. And then finally, I guess the architecture of the houses. Looks you're going for a pretty simple traditional kind of cottage vernacular or whatever, and they're looking and this is maybe more of like a nuanced, like, subjective thing, so take this as you want, but the typologies where the gable is perpendicular to the road, where you see the peak, and you get this kind of rhythm of peaks, like generally in kind of garden suburb neighborhoods, when you're walking around them in sort of any city, the streets that are, in my opinion, the most successful are the ones that have that kind of rhythm. Too many of the gable that dies into the street, it's I don't know, it's maybe not least dignified, but somehow less I don't know. It's like not. It's like almost looks like the building isn't totally facing the street or something like that. And so, I would just. I think like having a few that break up. Like the regular gables is totally fine. But if you end up with a street that's entirely made of the sideways gables, there tends to be less kind of visually and interesting. And I guess in the garden suburbs where they are more successful is like the old craftsman style, right? Where there's like the little longer gables, and then there's a much more sort of ornate or interesting kind of dormer that kind of and then animates that facade. And I just don't feel like that particular, I can't remember if it was the Reese or the Tate, but to me that was just not working not working quite as well as the others yet. But that's again could be a development. And then my last comment then is I do think that allowing the flexibility for ADUs in the rear, or even just the ability to have like a home office or a studio or something in the back, just building that into whatever guidance and making sure obviously that it works with the zoning regs. It would be an important way to kind of add more diversity of spaces and living opportunities in the neighborhood. Yeah, and that was it for my comments. But thanks. I think this is really exciting to see this project, and can't wait to see it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Osborne, what are your thoughts on the project?
Sure. Thanks. If you can go back to the site plan. So I'll just kind of work my way down a little bit of a list here. So I think thanks for the sharing this with us. I think it's thoughtful in terms of an approach, but obviously there's still work to carry it forward. The parking, I'm not going to comment on that. I think your response has kind of clarified most of my thoughts that I had initially. But I will say, though, related to the street cross section and how you kind of move along Woodland in contrast to Virginia, the one comment that I do have is you're kind of stitching into an existing community that's here, and you're presenting a new cross section of the street. As particularly at the sidewalks, as you come back to those existing conditions, knowing that those existing conditions are really not going to change for a long time, I'd like to see how you thoughtfully transition. And I don't necessarily mean on the civil sense in terms of grades and all that. I'm speaking more in terms of the human senses and someone walking through from an existing community and then crossing your community to get to Park Heights. What does that actually feel like? So I think there needs to be a little bit more intention there. And along those lines as well, the open spaces, I think you've gone through a variety of studies and you've landed on a few locations where, you can clearly identify meaningful open spaces. But I think Pavlina picked it up because I was going to comment on that, So I'm not going to, go into it, but I'll just have her kind of share her thoughts there. But I do believe, and I second Sharon and Kevin's observation as well, particularly that park that's off the alley. I'm really concerned about that. And that's one of the reasons I asked about the water feature, right? Is there a way you can potentially modify that a little bit to introduce more of a water feature that would kind of provide a little bit of contrast to the open spaces? Not necessarily something in terms of a pool where kids can go and wade, but at least there's some kind of a water element that they can relate to in terms of sound, visuals, etc. They can go sit by it, stick their feet into it, that kind of thing. So I think that would be a welcomed addition to your proposal so far. But related to the open spaces, so I will comment on not necessarily the corner at Homer and Virginia, as in the obtuse angled corner. I'm going to comment more on the acute angled corners, right? So there's one there at Homer and Virginia, and there's one at Woodland and Homer. And then the question is that really the best use of that transition, that sort of that intersection? Are there other things you can introduce, or can you configure it slightly differently? And I don't think the answer is just to chamfer it and stick something there. I'm saying, is there a way maybe that end lot, that corner lot, in as much as it's a little bit different, it may be a little bit bigger, perhaps it doesn't need to include the acute portion. That acute portion can be given back to the public realm. And now you can really foster and forge some almost like a moment of pause as you're walking along the street. Maybe it's a pocket park of some sorts. Maybe it's something else, which would really kind of bring it back into the more urban realm. So I think these are some of the things that you probably can enhance as you move forward, which would make the project, in my opinion, a lot better, a lot softer to the residents. Open spaces, I think it's a challenge to connect these open spaces, both physically and visually, just in terms of where they are and how they are set out. But I will say, though, that just as an example, if I'm living in the house all the way, the last house down at Woodland Avenue, and I'm trying to get to the lawn, someone at my age probably won't go to the lawn because it just seems as though it's very remote, right? And I'm looking for ways that you can better connect all of the houses and the residences to the major amenities that are around the site. And that's one of the reasons I sort of touched on in my questions. Is there an opportunity to open up the extension of, I guess it's Beaufort, and carry that through? And it doesn't necessarily need to be a road. Perhaps it could be, you can call it an alley, but an alley that's more enhanced and some more attention given to the pedestrian feel, to provide a little bit better connection there. I think that what that will do as well is, as you kind of walk along the street, any of these streets, and you get to these major intersections, it's going to force you to pay more attention to these edges, right? So as any of these alleys intervene onto the public realm, onto the public street, what does that really feel like? Is it just an alley that opens out? How is that very different to, let's say, what's actually happening at Homer? So I think because there's so many alleys that are intervening, you have to have a response to that, in my opinion. Okay. Let's see here. I think one thing related to the alleys, and I think Sharon kind of touched on it, is there a possibility to green those alleys a little bit more? I understand it's an alleyway, you're probably going to have garbage trucks moving down there and so forth. But in a way, even the idea of having the detached garages as well as the open parking space adjacent to them, maybe that could be arranged a little bit differently. Maybe you can pull that detached garage maybe about 4 or 5 feet off of the alley. And that allows you now an opportunity to go in and create some additional planting, that begins to kind of define that edge a little bit better. So if someone is literally walking up there to get to a park or to cut through, it doesn't feel as though they're walking through the back of a property, so to speak. Okay. And just let's see, I did have one other comment, maybe two. The landscaping, I think the selection of plant material is good. And what I like more about it is you're being a little bit more thoughtful about how you're spreading it around the site in a more balanced way. It's being allocated in a more balanced way. And I think that's great. Well, one comment related to the Muse. I understand you're working with a certain typology of buildings, and that's fine. But I don't know that the typology that's being communicated here along the Muse is really, I think it could be better, right? What I mean by that is if you had the opportunity to create a typology where instead of having the detached homes, you had semi-detached, I think it lends a bit more credence to the idea of the Muse as a stage drop to that big lawn area. Because right now, just calling it a Muse doesn't make it a Muse, if you understand what I mean, right? And
Yes.
I know why you're doing it. You're doing it because you need to find a front door to all those units. Okay?
Yes.
But it seems like it's a weak solution to me. And I think potentially you may have to revisit the typology of those units to help reinforce the idea of how that muse potentially can work. And then finally, again, related to the buildings, one of the challenges I think here is, and maybe this is just the next iteration of your work, as you kind of look at the various building typologies, you have to think of them in terms of where exactly in this entire site they will exist. And I know you're showing clusters of building typologies, around the site, but I don't believe that there's any thought given to, and maybe I might have missed it. There's not much thought given to those units that front onto, let's say, alleys, those that front onto open space, and those that are just side units. It seems as though it's just the same typology everywhere. And I think you have to be a little bit more deliberate and intentional in terms of, for instance, that one unit in the middle there that's sitting in front and onto the park. How could that ever be the same as the unit next to it? It really shouldn't be, because the conditions are so different. So I'm looking for opportunities where you can now really anchor, these various typologies to very specific locations of the site. So there's a kind of a relationship between the site and what those building types are. So, but other than that, it's a great start, and I commend you on that. And those are my comments.
Thank you.
Back to you, Pavlina. Oh, mute issues.
I was able to unmute you, Pavlina.
I was going to say, I'm trying to figure that out.
Nah, she's trying to, yeah.
She muted
Oh
herself.
no, it's not
maybe.
working.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I can see you. Okay. Oh, all right. Sorry about this. It's one of those days. So thank you for unmuting me too. I can at least say I'm here. I'm alive. Thank you all for the comments, and obviously for the very thoughtful presentation. Great work so far. I mean, I know this is a challenging side. You've gone through many studies of kind of piecing it together, and you've arrived at something that is very thoughtful. And it starts to speak of a neighborhood, right? I think that's ultimately the goal. I think some of the quotes you used from Olmsted were really, honing in on like, this wants quality of life, this wants to feel kind of familiar, warm, and whatnot. And I feel like that's been kind of the trend with some of these home builder projects in Baltimore, is that as larger enough areas open for development, and that was one of my questions earlier about the row houses as well, similar to Kevin. As these open up for development, the question is always, do we build more row houses? Baltimore is a city of row houses, or do we actually start to introduce a different housing typology and bring more like variety of products to the market? And not surprisingly, single-family detached houses have seen success on the market because they are not replicating. I mean, there's certainly a market for brand new construction row homes, which are already different than renovating an existing one or simply purchasing from the market. But single-family detached is, a lot more rare within the city limits. So there's a lot of neighborhoods and developments that are moving in that direction, and to the extent to which it brings residents into the neighborhoods and satisfies a piece of the market, it makes sense. I think one thing to, sorry, I'm starting a little bit backwards. I'm going to start from the buildings, the big picture, kind of and then we're going to come back to the site plan. But there were comments earlier from Kevin and others about the legibility of the neighborhood. Of course, when you're working with a home builder, these are specific, houses. They've already been designed, they get modified and kind of, customized for the site and things like that. So without any, hesitation, that you're always risking the cookie cutter sort of effect, right? And, coming from the suburbs, who are known as, sort of developing cookie cutter tract housing is the only hesitation that people have when they see these projects here. It's like, oh, okay, so now we're bringing the ubiquity of the suburbs into the city, right? So I think the design problem here is how do you bring that desirable product to the market in an urban environment? And how do you adapt it without, of course, reinventing the wheel? Because that's not the point, right? We're bringing a product that people like and would purchase elsewhere, right? So we're trying to bring it into the city and try to make it without sort of duplicating the suburbs in Park Heights, trying to make it fit somehow, in the surrounding neighborhood. So I think knowing that this is a master plan kind of level discussion, but at the same time, this won't necessarily go to a design review because the houses are designed. I feel it's appropriate to have that conversation now and challenge the design and development team to address that. And I think it's very doable, and I think it's very important because it would really enable for this typology to be able to come into our market more readily if it becomes more compatible. So what are the things that make it more compatible, right? Like you can look at a row of row houses and say, well, those are cookie cutters too, right? They're designed by virtue of repetition. Many of them were designed in the sense of, sort of speculative housing. Some certainly were designed one off at a time, but, those blocks and blocks of row houses were speculative housing and they were housing the workforce of the 19th century. Anyways, long story short, where I'm coming at here is that I want to challenge the design team to look at the neighborhoods, even immediately surrounding you here, because, outside of this view, to the left, perhaps, are row houses, right? So I think it's really important to look at those, but kind of with a more, with a slightly more critical, educated eye. So what I'm talking about here is like, I'm not asking you to make single family homes look like these row houses, but to kind of pick up on some of the cues that make up kind of what's familiar about Baltimore or what makes it feel urbane. I think, for example, if you look at any kind of row house row, the amount of variability is actually very limited, right? Especially in these ones where you can see kind of two sets of duplexes, right? And then there's like a stick of red brick row houses on the left. Mm-hmm. So what that means is that you actually don't have to force an incredible amount of variety when you're working within a stretch of houses, because that's when it starts to feel suburban. When I think of a suburban street, I would think of like cookie cutter houses with 6 different types of brick, right? Because they're forcing kind of this variability and it creates noise and one-offs and this and that. So I think it's really important to actually analyze this from the point of view of like the rhythm and the repetition that is familiar to an urban neighborhood, and then where does the variety happen? Like how does one like really start to create these identifiable moments? Is it the paint of the porches? Is it the paint of the front doors? Can the houses, and I think so far you're illustrating them mostly staying within kind of the dark gray and the light gray kind of variety. So when you make a row of these, like this, for example, do you stay within a couple of tones, within a stretch and a stick, or do you bring 5 different colors? Like which one is the suburban approach and which one is the urban approach where you can see some of that repetition? And it's okay as long as it builds some variety. Same thing happens with these random push and pulls. I can't tell exactly from this render, but it appears to me that some of the houses are pushing in slightly or not. And maybe it's because you're just alternating different types. But when I look at this speaks to me suburbs. And I think part of it is because it kind of brings this randomization that you just don't see in the city. It just nobody, kind of designs in a random sort of fashion. And here's one of these and here's one of those. I realize that perhaps even within the typology, people, may want some variability, but I would challenge you to do so, but with rigor and with intention. And only then would it feel like the quality and the dignified sort of urban neighborhood rather than the anything goes kind of suburban stretch. I think it's very nuanced, but it can happen. And I think if you manage to figure out how to do that, then you really are opening kind of the gateways to like great success, where these will no longer feel foreign, implanted kind of in these contexts. I think it's really important to address that. So similarly, I think in these renders, what we don't see, because they're probably meant to illustrate the houses themselves, is the street section. So can we go to the Virginia street section, for example? I thought that was tremendous in the sense of kind of the quality of the urban neighborhood that it creates, because it shrinks the streets, to their bare minimum, to what they need to be. It introduces kind of that green buffer, then the walking zone, then kind of the generous forecourt, and to that extent, these layers are what's found in the urban neighborhoods. This is what will help the neighborhood read and be legible in this sort of way, as opposed to, say, the suburban version where it would be like, maybe sidewalk straight to lawn with one sole tree kind of stuck in the middle of it, right? So I think to the extent to which the streets follow the urbane quality, and then the building selections and their, articulation to the extent to where they're not forcing kind of randomization for no reason, could really tie everything together and give it kind of this familiar Americana kind of attitude that this is seeking and that we know people would appreciate. But without necessarily, feeling completely out of place. And in fact, setting the tone, right, for other things that can happen in similar fashion. So those were my notes kind of on the bigger picture and the vision of it. And so I want to work my way into the public spaces then. So if we can go to, we'll remember this section because we'll kind of come back up to it. So we looked at this slide for a while. The first thing that struck me when I saw the schemes is that you started with a really large green space there where 3 is, right? And it slowly got reduced. And I think maybe that's why that focal point ended up staying where it was, because it was a function of a large green space that eventually sort of got shrank. And that's where it is, because I feel that if that wasn't the case, if that was always a row of houses there, maybe you would have found that. I can hear you, Heather, and you're just whispering, but I think you can probably mute yourself.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
Then you can talk freely.
Who came in with me?
if you just mute yourself, you guys can talk freely. But all I'm saying is that it's sort of, and it happens all the time when you work iteratively, certain elements just end up where they are because everything else around them changes a lot, and they just sort of stay there. It's like, oh, that would work. But when you really look at it with a fresh eye, the way we're sort of offering here is that you start to think, maybe if that was thought about differently, rather than sort of left from a large green space, but rather really as this gateway moment and a place that you would mostly kind of come to, but then go. It's passive in a way that but it's also serving a gateway thing. You probably wouldn't put it there. So you heard it from everybody. I think it makes sense studying this idea that, and to do that, I think you need to expand the view to the north. That's where you start. This is a phased project. It has a much in terms of how you've been thinking about it and how it's conceived. It starts from an arterial road with higher density project. Those projects, especially on the left side, have a mini plaza in front, like they have that public interface. And even when that phase was getting developed, we talked about it, like how do you quickly transition into houses, right? And so once these houses in the previous phase are facing Virginia, are you going to follow this down or do you realign? So that's an earlier conversation. I'm not sure if you were involved in it and whatnot, but we knew it was going to come. So maybe there's just no continuity in that kind of discussion, or old notes for that matter. But I think you need to start from there, because the reality is, while you're only controlling what's in red, that's not how the project will be perceived. It would always be perceived in the continuum. So once you start to study that, you quickly realize that across the street, you're not facing houses, it's sort of the sides of them, which immediately gives you a point of transition. So what happens on the opposite side of the street, right? So let's go to your plan now. I think you're very well positioned to create 2 gateway moments. In fact, even if you slice a little triangle off of the lot on the right side of Virginia, and then take the first 2 houses on the left side of Virginia, you can complete that gesture from Park Heights, the public plaza, the houses that are facing Virginia that are arriving at this gateway, which is a green space, and maybe on the left side it can have some kind of a feature. On the right side, it can be just a little bit more generous landscape. And it's sort of like this green gateway into this. And then the houses on the left and the right then reorient themselves readily, right? To face Homer. So you're already there in terms of the grain you've created. It's really the location right now of the green space that is making the least amount of space, the number 3 green space that is, for many reasons. One is because it's a focal point that presents itself behind an alley, on the back of houses, surrounded by garages and a side of house. And it just becomes, that much more difficult to justify as something communal. Yes, if it felt like a backyard, maybe, but at the same time, it wants to be public. So it's very conflicted there. I think the 2 houses from the left can easily turn around and come and face Virginia. I would question whether you need the whole house on the right side. I think you can even, again, just use some of the green space of the triangle there and leave your house alone on the right side. So it's not changing your yield. It's mostly swapping the 2 houses from facing Homer to facing Virginia and creating a continuous green gateway there. Instead of a gazebo, does it have a little fountain? It plays the same role. The noise does attract everyone and children, and it's lovely. And even off season, if it's designed well, it's a nice little feature, even if the water isn't running. Something to consider, but otherwise it could be some other sort of destination. And I feel that it happens at the right place because Virginia is this lovely urban street, right? It's green, it has shade canopy, it has all of that. And for it to kind of come to the corner of that and Homer and connect to all of the other public elements that are happening north of that makes a lot of sense, right? So I really want to encourage the team to look at that and really realign that vision from that point of view. And that brings me again to the next thing about the whole alley thing. I feel like it's, as designed currently, it's forcing people to walk through the alley. Can we go to your next slide? Because I think when you started introducing the vegetation is where it really starts to show that you are seeing that these are garages backing into the public space, and you've already illustrated vegetation. It's your plan with the planting plan.
Sorry, I didn't hear you. It's which plan are you looking for?
The one that has the trees on it.
The landscape plan?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep, there it is. So if you look at that space, you're already introducing heavy amount of planting to buffer the garages and the this and the that, right? So you're already kind of understanding that those are not desirable kind of viewpoints. What I worry about is that while you're trying to screen that from view from that space, you're also screening the view into the space. I don't know that it's safe. You know what I mean? By the time you do all of the screening and all the fences come up, I don't know that it would feel right to be shoved like all the way in the back there, surrounded by alleys. There's times when you can design a green alley and when it's really needed. To me here, it feels forced. It feels forced because there's leftover sort of green space that we're trying to make use of. But it's really trying to force people to move through that space. And unless I see sidewalk there on the green side of the alley, understood on the garage side, you can't do that. But on the green side, you could, right? Mm-hmm. So that for it to become a green alley, it would have to be the driveway. And then on the planned south side of it, it would need to have some kind of a walkway for it to really even feel remotely inviting. It would need to have lighting so that people feel safe to move through there. All that is a long way of saying, I don't know if it's necessary, but if it is, you should plan it in a way, and it should be codified in a way. I'll get to that in a second. So we're not just throwing terms around. I have to look up what green alley is, and I guarantee you there's a lot of different definitions about what that is. I don't know that it exists in Baltimore. There's great alley streets, but they're great because they have townhouses, row houses and things facing into them, and there's activity in front doors and stuff like that. The ones that only have garages and fences facing them are not great. They're never green, So I think less so than thinking about these things thematically, we need to think about them typologically. All right, so what makes a walkable alley and what are the minimum requirements for that to be called that, green or blue, whatever it is. But if it's meant to be a pedestrian alley, then it needs to have the accommodations for it. Lastly, what I would say is that with the amount of tree canopy that you're creating through the streets, with the amount of attention that you're giving to all of the layers of the streets, I also question the motive of pushing people away from the street and have them walk through the alleys. Why? If these are great urban neighborhood streets, let's enjoy them, right? So I would like to walk with the toddler or with the stroller or even with my teenager and the dog in the evening along Virginia because it's like so great, right? And I want to arrive at the corner, kind of mess around at the fountain or whatever else ends up happening there and continue my path to the large park, in a way that isn't asking me to snake through people's garages for no other reason other than, well, they sort of designed it that way, So it's something to revisit and rethink. I think the option of being able to cut through the alley is a good one, especially as it connects to the forested little site, on the left. But I think that needs to be accommodated and legible in the plan and typologically defined in order for it to be real. So that was really the only piece from the overall kind of public space and green space that didn't quite make sense to me. And I think with some very limited tweaks can really transform the plan. I'm excited about this idea of having a gateway moment that takes you through this lovely Virginia street and all the way to the lawn. I think the lawn will be wildly successful. Because it's probably the most flexible use of space. That's where the kids will kick the ball. This is where all that will happen. It's not too large. It really is sized well, so it has that kind of community feel to it. I think the kids with the balls and the bicycles and all that will love that. And I think you heard some comments regarding the muse aspect of it and the types of the houses that are bordering that. I think that's very valid because that being kind of this very public space, it kind of commands a little bit more of a slightly higher density, and if attached houses reflect higher density here in a kind of a more complete wall, because to the left and to the right, I think you have townhouses, right? Like, yeah, in sticks. So
Yes, they're duplexes and
duplexes. Yeah, you might want to think about from a three-dimensional thought how that, less about kind of your parcels and what's there, but how does that lawn get completed? Like from a three-dimensional point of view, when you stand there, and if you want this to feel like a cohesive neighborhood, like what is the type of kind of edge that you want to create so that, less about which three of the options we've created are going to fit there. It's more about if I change the view from standing at the tip of the circle there, kind of looking, you have houses on all sides, right? It has this really glorious circular effect to it. I think it will be important to think of it from that perspective also. The last thing I would say about the woodland retreat, I'm still trying to come to terms with the scale of it because the images you showed much larger green spaces. Mm-hmm. I also love meadows, but they need a lot of sunlight, which kind of strips away the canopy that you're showing. So I hear and see some conflicting kind of scenarios there, and you're dealing with a very limited amount of space. So at one point, I'm wondering which one is it going to be, Mm-hmm. So I think that even that is as well intentioned as it is. I think it needs a closer look. In general, I feel that from what was presented in this, and I realize it's a first pass. I don't know if we'll see the project again, but in the case that we don't, before this gets codified, and I feel like in order for this to get codified into a master plan and kind of move to development, we need to transition what's been done so far design-wise from the thematic, which is like when you show a woodland, you show us pictures of woodlands, right? When you show us a transition zone, there's like this little green patch of stuff. Like these are themes, right? And it's fine. You start the design with like, this is the kind of space I want to make a lawn, right? But eventually it needs to become a typology, which means that you'll become a lot more real about the sizes, the adjacencies, and the amenities that one would require if you're doing one thing or the other. So I'm curious to see if that ends anything you walk over, it's just the mode path. Before it goes into a master plan, if there's enough definition that can be given to it, because a lot of things change over time, and especially when it comes to some of these green spaces, and when they finally get to execution, some of that is getting lost in translation. So what was a thematic approach to something, if it doesn't get codified into a typological condition, and it shows, the types of surfaces and the types of amenities and the types of landscape that it receives, then it becomes really vague and it gets lost in translation further down the road. So whether this comes back to us and we're able to follow up on this, or it gets reviewed on staff level, I think it's important to track those things and eliminate some of that vagueness, because that's the only way to ensure that the plan gets executed as intended, and not sort of as it sort of falls when it comes to that. That's the extent of my comments. I want to thank you all for great work, and for really putting this together. We're excited to see it come through.
Thank you.
Any additional comments from planning or from the panel? Now is the time to speak. Go ahead, please.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. And Heather, if you could make sure that the final draft the final presentation is shared with me, I can post to the website. We'll have minutes available for you in the coming days. And we'll set up a meeting to talk about next steps and where we go from here. Thank you, everybody. This is the final. There's the second item for today will be heard this afternoon, beginning at 1. And that is the DSEI Center for Johns Hopkins. Have a great lunch, and we'll see you at 1.
Thank you all. Bye.